Hi, Chuck. I'm Cece. How are you?
Doing all right, Cece. As you already introduced me, I'm Chuck Paul. I'm the Director of Outreach and CST Services for Maas Youth Alternatives. And a lot of times folks ask me what CST stands for, and that's commercial sex trafficking.
Wonderful. Sorry, I was messing with the distribution here as to how we want to see the screen. Again, my name is Cece, and I lead A21 Freedom Chasers. We're a nonprofit organization in San Antonio that brings awareness to the issue of human trafficking in San Antonio and surrounding areas. So you might have seen Chuck in a lot of our events. Chuck is a really good partner of our organization. We do a lot of work together, including the Talk for Freedom podcast, where Caesar and Chuck tackle topics and will bring facts to the issue of human trafficking, as well as introduce different organizations that are fighting this effort across Texas and really across the world. I think you all have had different guests that have been from all over. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to Chuck and get a real pulse on some of the things that are happening right now, especially in San Antonio with the issue of human trafficking and this pandemic that we have going on, the COVID-19 pandemic that has hit everyone in this year of 2020. In order to keep us on track, I set a timer for 25 minutes and we'll have this 30-minute conversation. So I don't want to take up a lot of time. Chuck, what would you like to share with us about what Roy Maas is doing during this time?
So Maas Youth Alternatives has been around about 40 plus years, started back in the early 70s. Started out with our founder, Roy Maas. And Roy just really had this heart for serving the marginalized youth, the kids that lived under the bridge. You know, that was his heart for them. And he started out going around. He was a very charismatic person, one of those people that you couldn't say no to. Like, his passion just came out of him when he talked. And, you know, he got folks to give him the resources, the financial resources, to start an organization, which he called Youth Alternatives. And the idea being is that prior to this, what was happening was, you know, street kids would get arrested and go to jail. The only place there was for them is detention centers. Instead, he offered a resource where there is someplace they can go. It started out with one of the earlier grants they got was what's called the Runaway Homeless Youth Grant. And what that is that it's a federal grant that allows a 21-day stay at an emergency shelter for a kid that's run away or from home or homeless. And as years went on, he started working with other populations and opening other programs. So a few years back, as you know, we started to recognize back in the early 2000s that we've been serving this population for a while. At the time I worked for the state, of these youth that were being exploited out there and sold for sex. And these are kids that they were having to survive by engaging in sex acts. You know, when I was a teenager in the 80s, they called them teenage prostitutes. It was something that was just like, it's just another teenage prostitute. And I remember in my days when I was working on the border and, working for the state, I've actually used that term until I came to realize who these teenage prostitutes were. What they were is they were runaways, homeless youth, a lot of times foster kids that had, run away from their current placement. Sometimes they were running away from more abuse. Sometimes they were running away because that's really the only thing they could do. If they fought, they'd go to jail. If they shut down, they were going to end up getting in consequences, and they felt completely out of control. They just run away for a few hours and come back. We see that all the time at Roy Maas. Unfortunately, the bad guys are out there waiting for them, and the bad guys know this, and they've learned how to manipulate this. So what we have now at Roy Maas Youth Alternatives, and we were one of the first ones to start, was called Central Secure Drop-In Center. It was the first 24-hour 7 days a week, 365 days a year drop-in center specifically geared towards kids that were being exploited out there in the streets. Because prior to our opening in 2017, what was happening was that if a kid was pulled out of the back of a motel room, they were just raped by 6 clients, right? They were taken to detention centers because there was nowhere else to take them. The foster homes weren't prepared to handle the level of trauma behaviors that they had. The shelters weren't prepared to handle the behaviors that they had that were related to trauma. You know, we call it PTSD, call it shell shock, call it trauma-related behavior. So now what happens is, instead of these kids go to detention centers, they come to Central Seguro. Central Seguro has been operating now for about 3 years. And I can tell you, we go through highs and lows depending on what's going on in the world. And lately it has been hopping, just absolutely hopping.
Have you seen a difference in the intake of kids that you have coming in based on what we have experienced with COVID?
Sure, certainly. You know, back in early January, late January, early February, Dr. Julie Strench, which is my boss, she is our chief program officer. She called all the directors in and she said, I'm seeing something on the horizon. I'm seeing this virus, this COVID-19 virus. This is going to be the next pandemic. This is going to be big. You know, and honestly, I could say that I was like, what? I've heard this kind of thing before from people, doom and gloom and pandemic and everything else. It sounded a little bit like science fiction to me. But she made us come up with a hardcore plan. And we looked at our ventilation systems at our buildings, and we looked at how many ventilation systems fill into which, and which areas we can make as zero pressure rooms, and where we could isolate someone and not mix the air with another part of the building, and started getting personal protective equipment. And we put into a regiment of working our staff 13 hours a day, 3 days a week with 4 days off, so they have time to recover. And then during that 13-hour shift, they have to do 2 thorough cleanings of the area that they're in. And, you know, this is multiple rooms, as well as weekly deep cleans. And these cleanings are like, every surface is getting wiped down with some type of bleach product or alcohol-based product. Fabrics are being spritzed with an alcohol-based product, you know, mopping, sweeping, the walls are being wiped down. And, you know, at first it's like, well, it's pretty cool. I can see how this has worked with the flu season, because we've had, flu season always gets us bad with kids around. But what started happening is that in late February, early March, you know, the bottom fell out of the world.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, science fiction became science fact. And suddenly, places started to shut down, like shelters were shutting down. The places where these kids are taken to, the foster kids that CP take them to, the foster homes, the service providers that provide things like job training and, just day spots where they can get some resources, they started shutting down. And suddenly this, the poor, which were hit the most hardest with this, they couldn't go home and Zoom into work. They had to go to work. We started calling them, instead of we started calling the working poor, we started calling them essential workers.
Right.
They had to go to work. They couldn't Zoom in. And their kids weren't in school. And their kids had nowhere to go and no resources. And the pressure became more and more mounting. And then those of them that had jobs where they had 2 and 3 jobs just barely scraping by, well, these businesses started to close, and suddenly domestic violence went up, and child abuse went up, and running away went up, and people tired of being at home, kids being tired, running off, they're not supervised at school. I mean, suddenly we started to get this influx of, and we went from our average age being 15 that was coming brought in, so we started having groups of itty bitties, I mean babies, toddlers,
Wow.
6-month-olds, teenagers with babies. I had to go get baby supplies. While everyone else was stocking up on toilet paper and paper towels, I was stocking up on diapers,
Yeah.
and try getting baby wipes and that. It was crazy. And we're trying to help these families. Luckily, because we have been around a long time, luckily because I have a lot of contacts, places that were quote unquote closed and weren't taking new clients, well, they took new clients, but they took new clients because I cashed in pretty much every chip I had. I mean, every favor I had, I was burning through resources like no tomorrow. I still am.
Right.
My staff was all fairly new at the time, and,
Mm-hmm.
and we just didn't know what to expect. And it's been challenging. I mean, to say the least. So now when you walk in that front door, you're going to immediately get temperature checked. You're going to get asked a series of questions to screen for COVID. If they need a medical screening, they're going to go to the hospital to get a medical screening. If they're threaten themselves, if they're suicidal or homicidal, they have to go to the psychiatric unit, one of the psychiatric hospitals. But, we started to run out of room. I went from maybe 2-3 kids were helping a night to 9.
Wow.
And they were, like I said, the age ranges, we serve up to age 24. So now I've got anywhere from toddler to 24 years old. And I've got cots.
Was there ever a time where you had to say no to anyone? Like,
yeah, there was. It wasn't that there was no room. It was that your level of problems is too much for what I've got in here right now. If I've got a bunch of young kids in there and then I have a 19-year-old show up who has got a drug problem,
I see.
We'd have to say no. And it's just, we do the best we possibly could to try to find them places. And I've had people come to the door going, yeah, I know I might be 42, but I really need help. And I'm like, I can't help you. And the homeless population is just growing. So, we're trying to do the best we possibly can. But what we've started to do now is we went and got hotel vouchers.
Okay.
And so these young adults, these 18 to 24-year-olds that we serve, if they're stable enough and I can give them a list of tasks they have to complete each day, we check in with them every single day. We check their hotel room every day. They have a contract they sign that says no guests in the hotel room, no drugs, no alcohol, no tobacco. You have to show documented, that you've done, like, look for 3 jobs. You've done 7 job applications. You've gone and applied for AFDC. And if they don't know how to do this, we show them how to do it. But, these kids are not like sickly kids or drug addicts we're sticking to the hotel rooms. These are young adults that maybe had a job, was living at home, but, the family's run out of resources. Their restaurant job closed down and they got nowhere to go. Their family threw them out.
Yeah.
They were staying with an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. They aged out of foster care, and now there's nowhere else for them to go. So these are young adults that aren't looking for handouts. They're looking for hand up. We give them gift cards for meal cards, and we check in with them every single day. And we've had quite a few successes. And what we've done after about a week or so, we're able to, now that we've opened the Annie Laurie house back at Turning Point, we're able to move them into one of the 6 houses we have at Turning Point. So let me explain my care continuum here.
Sure.
So Centro Seguro acts as a triage center. It's very similar to an emergency room.
Okay.
Police officer shows up at 2:00 in the morning with a child or a youth, right? Or they call the hotline, hey, I need help, or they walk in on their own. My team assesses them for abuse, neglect, exploitation, human trafficking. Depending on what the assessment says, we start getting those resources in place to what they need. So what that, if I have a kid that may have not been trafficked, but they're high risk for trafficking, so they don't have to go to the hospital for a sexual assault exam, but they're going to need a shower, they're going to need clean clothes, they're going to need a place to sleep, and we're going to start figuring out who's their guardian. Can they go back home? Is there someone looking for them? Are they in CPS? Is there something we can do as far as alternative placement? That kid may go to that. We have the ability to send that child within 24 hours over to our emergency shelter. And our emergency shelter, we have 21-day stays for runaway homeless youths. We still have that. We have 90-day stays for kids that have been trafficked. We also have 90-day stays for kids that are in foster care that CPS takes custody of, as well as 90-day stays for kids that are working with juvenile justice. So they can go over there. Now, if they're over 18, I can get them now into a hotel room. I've only got a limited amount of those vouchers, but I can get them into a hotel room for a week while we work with them, and then see about space at one of our 6 houses at our transitional living facility, which is Turning Point. This is all on one campus. We have 6 houses. They live in a house with 5 or 6 other young people of their same gender. They have daily tasks they have to complete. They don't have a case manager standing over the top of them telling them what to do. Like, they have to be independent young adults.
And explain why that's important, Chuck. Explain why it's important that you give them these tasks.
Well, because as was put by one of my survivors, she said, people who have experienced what I've experienced, this is a young lady who had been sex trafficked. She says, people who have experienced what I've experienced, they don't work, they don't go to school. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they're too afraid. They're too afraid of everything and everyone. They're afraid and they're sad, they're depressed, so they're not motivated. So by giving them teeny tiny goals, you have to put in 7 job applications today. You have to get on this website and fill out this form for TANF ADC, which is food stamps. It's itty bitty bite-sized tasks that shows them that they can accomplish things on their own.
Right.
But not only that, when they're in trafficking, the traffickers take away all their choices. They take away all their ability to, operate independently. The traffickers make them very codependent on them.
Right.
By giving them these little itty bitty tasks to do, what happens is we're giving them back their own power. We're giving them back their voice. This made me angry. This made me sad. This is something that they have to work on with our clinicians, because of course, if they're going to work with our clinicians the entire time. Because in addition to the shelter, the drop-in center, and the transitional living facility, we're anchored by our family counseling and resource center, which is open 6 days a week, provides free counseling in many cases for folks that are youth that are under the age of 24. We've got one grant that does 16 to 24, another that does 0 to 8, and then VOCA grant covers all the way across the board if they've been a victim of any kind of crime. And this helps them get the clinical experience, master level clinician counseling. It's a nice thing about my drop-in center is that I have a master clinician for my drop-in center. So I have a clinician, and then she oversees other clinicians that will, that will assess my kids at 2:00 in the morning when they need to be assessed.
I remember early in the pandemic, I met with a whole bunch of different nonprofit organizations as well as the governor's office, and we talked about COVID-19 and the effects that were going on. It was kind of like a pulse check that the governor's office wanted to get on different people from different parts of Texas. And one of the things that I heard from an organization in Houston was that their manpower was depleted because in trying to help these victims that had survived sex trafficking, they were now being exposed themselves to this coronavirus. And in many cases, they were also infected. And so at some point, there was no one to care for these victims. And it just became this awful cycle where you want to help, but you can't help because you have to care for yourself and your family now that has now been exposed. Did you all have anything like that occurred at RMYA?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because my chief program officer had the foresight to say, this is bad, we got to prepare now, we were better prepared than most.
Okay, good.
So we had some masks, we had some cleaning products, we had some hand sanitizer. Now, we had to jump through hoops once the pandemic kicked off to continue to have that level of supplies we needed just for day-to-day operations. And as you know, A21 showed up one day with this huge gift of gallons and gallons of hand sanitizer, and I cried. I mean, like, we needed that. We needed that to keep our people healthy and to keep our kids healthy. So I know I've had kids that have shown up and they're positive for coronavirus. I mean, they're positive. I've had kids that have been brought to my facility and the police officers, like, they're not sick where they have to be at the hospital, but they're positive and no one wants them.
Yeah.
What do you say to a 15-year-old that because you're sick, no one wants you?
Right.
So, we were able to put them in a face shield and a mask and gloves and isolate them in one room because we've already got a plan. We already got a plan about where they would go. And then put our staff into a face shield and masks and gloves. And I mean, think of hospital level material and hospital level cleanings twice a shift. So 13-hour shifts, there's 2 of them. So 4 times a day, hospital level cleanings, and then deep cleans once a week. We're busting hump. So I had a lot of staff. I had some staff that thought they were sick and they weren't sick. But we also had a lot of staff at Maas Youth Alternatives that were like, I'm too scared. I can't do this.
Yeah.
I had one of my staff just tell me, like, no, I can't do this. I'm too frightened. I'm too, I've had those that have quit because of anxiety, and they quit. They want to help, but they're so scared. And, I've been exposed to positive people that were positive 6 different times, but what do? I wear my mask, I wear my gloves, I put on a face shield if I need to, I get in there because if we don't say yes, who's going to?
Right. And you all are what we consider as well as essential workers, right? You all are out there helping those people. I know Freedom Chasers, we made a conscious decision early on when all of this started to check on all of the organizations that we're partners with, that we knew were in the trenches and were having to help these victims at this time. So we're an awareness group, and that means that we get to do a lot of the social media stuff that we normally would do without COVID, but more so during this time. So immediately we reached out and said, how can we help? We sent out financial support where needed, and then we backed all up with needs like the hand sanitizer. I remember when y'all said that, we were like, we can do that. We can provide hand sanitizer, and we got gallons and gallons of hand sanitizer delivered.
It was awesome.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the post, you have to go on social media and see the boxes of hand sanitizer. It's like you said, it's the little things, but they mean so much when they're needed, right?
And that's the thing, is that I could say that one of the things we started, because our volunteers were like, oh my gosh, I can't volunteer there because it's, COVID.
Right.
And they didn't know what to do. And there was a lot of folks that are like, I can't give you guys, I don't have money to give you, but, I'm on Amazon and I could click on one item to have shipped to you.
Sure.
So we put together this Amazon wish list, and, you can go on there, find it, look up Maas Youth Alternatives Amazon wish list, and I can send you the link, Cece.
Okay.
But the Amazon wish list, so now, like, we're getting boxes every day. And I don't mean like one box. I mean like 2, 3, 4 boxes of, and it may be like energy bars, hand sanitizer, face masks, coloring books, but coloring books that are like bold, and they say like bold and strong. And it's a coloring book about, young woman empowerment, right? Yeah, cots. People are sending me brand new cots because my cots are getting beat up at this point, right?
Right.
So I'm getting boxes of cots sent to me. We put things on there we really need, and people buy them for us. And so, I write that down and I give that information to our development team. We send them a thank you note, and that's an in-kind donation. But people don't realize how much they've gotten us through with just it. I bought a cot. I mean, who can say let me tell you what happened with that cot. You bought that cot, and that very night that we got that package, some young person that was on the streets came into us that night, dirty, scared, and a bad thing probably happened to them. And they always do. Mm-hmm. And that night they slept, maybe the first time they slept in days or weeks, because they knew they were safe. There's a police officer to protect them at the very front entrance. They're not there to police the youth. They're there to keep the bad things out. They slept in that cot that night and they got a good night's sleep. The next day meant that now they were in their right mind because they weren't sleep deprived. So we could talk to them about what could happen. They're able to start getting therapy to deal with what's happened to them. Not only that, down the road, they're able to start talking about who did this, and bad guys went to jail. All because you bought a cot.
Yes, that's so important. We have been partners from the beginning, right? And I just want our viewers to know that when they support A21 Freedom Chasers, they support that. They support your mission of providing this place. Every time we've had a care kit party, every time somebody's written a love note, it's all gone to these kinds of instances and scenarios. And I want to ask two questions. One is a fun question. What has been one blessing for you during this pandemic, for you personally? And then two, what would you tell people to stay encouraged about this fight against human trafficking and how to keep fighting?
I think the biggest blessing for me was, I mean, outside of like those moments when suddenly, you know, your Caesar showed up with a truckload of hand sanitizer, that killed me. Like that was just, wow, you know. The gifts we're getting with the Amazon boxes, I mean, oh my God, you know, we couldn't have gotten through this without this blessing. And then the opportunities, we've never closed. We've stayed open through this entire pandemic. And I found this out, we're the only ones that did. We are Council on Accreditation, accredited drop-in center, the first in the country to be accredited. And we're the only ones that stayed open in Texas. We stayed open, never shut our doors, never stopped taking kids in. And Lord willing, we can continue to do that. But I get this blessing that y'all don't get to get. And I wish I could share this with you, but I really can't. Mm-hmm. Because these kids come into us hard. Yeah. And they got this mask on. Then they get a shower and something to eat. They get a little bit of rest, and you start talking to them. And at first they're hard, but then this moment happens when the mask drops. This moment, and then that moment, you go from streetwise kid, you know, that has done horrible things because they had to survive, to you actually get to see a glimpse of how God sees them. Yeah. Like, it's like, I know this is how God sees them. And I'm like, oh my, and I'm so blessed to see that, you know, and those little glimpses, you know, and their face softens and their attitude softens, and there's a level of love there, you know, and it's more like a parent to a child, but not so much like I am their parent, but it's just, it's such a blessing to get you know, and to have these young people, and, you know, they may forget me down the line. It's okay. Sure. But I got to see that one moment, and that's what keeps me going. Yeah. The bit of advice I got to say to people through this pandemic is you have to be, well, I know I couldn't do this without being a person of faith. I'm a person of faith. I self-care. Self-care means if it's 5 minutes in my office with a breathing technique and some alpha wave music and some, you know, and yes, I do use essential oils to kind of get myself out of the mindset, because you got to take an island in the middle of the chaos and calm your heart rate. Haven't been able to, you know, counseling sessions are hard to come by these days, but yes, I have a counselor. So you have to do self-care. You can't let that slip, because if you're not healthy, you can't help anybody else. And if you've got your own demons to deal with, don't think it's going to help somebody else. You've got to work on your demons first. But in this pandemic, there's a lot of fear. Mm-hmm. And fear has been driving this country. And as far as I'm concerned, fear has been all over social media. Fear is all over everything. And it's like the underlying, you could feel it. You could feel it. Mm-hmm. The fear. It's not just the pandemic has fueled other fears, old, nasty fears. And what I can tell people is you got to give it up to God. You've got to stop living in fear. Yeah. You've got to, you know, it doesn't mean take your mask off and run into the sick ward, the ward at the hospital, and breathe in the air. It means, be as wise as a serpent, but as gentle as a dove. But know that you can only do what you can do, but you can do a lot. And, and even if it's clicking something on Amazon, even if it's, but, we got election season coming up, get out there and vote, folks. I don't, vote whatever your conscience is, but get out there and vote. Use your voice for those who are oppressed. Do your research. Don't just share online, because there's a lot of stuff out there that is not based in fact. And, if you have a passion, like I have a passion for this particular population, those who have been oppressed, make sure you listen to them first.
Yeah.
It's real easy to think you know what's best for them. I get to see those moments where I get to see the mask fall off because I listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been the greatest education and blessing I've had so far.
Yeah, that's so important. I agree with you. I have several friends who are survivors, and I agree. That's the biggest lesson I've learned in this fight, is that when you listen to survivors, you learn so much more than you would on research or anything else that you do.
Mm-hmm. So for those of you, I got to do this plug. For those of you that would like to donate financially directly to Maas Youth Alternatives, you can go to RMYA, that's R as in Roy, M as in Maas, Y as in Youth, A as in Alternatives.org. You could go ahead and donate directly on there, directly to our organization. We need those dollars right now. There are grants out there, but there's so many more people competing for those grants. And the donor dollars have really greatly diminished because people don't know what the future is going to bring. We need those dollars, because if any given time we had to shut down one of our programs, which one do you choose?
Mm-hmm.
Do you choose the drop-in center and then kids go back to jails? Do you choose the transitional center living and then 18, 19, 24-year-olds are out there being exploited? They're literally living in ditches. The emergency shelter, and then what do you choose? We have to maintain open. We've stayed open. And we are very blessed that we have been able to make it so far. But, if anyone's ever interested, we could really use any resource. So, and I thank A21. You guys have been a massive, massive help through this season. I know you'll continue to do so. I have dreams, a lot of dreams. Dreams of more ways to serve young people out there to stop this, because when it comes to trafficking, a lot of times it seems like such a huge issue that people think that it cannot be stopped.
Mm-hmm.
But that is only another spirit of fear.
Right. Yeah.
It can be stopped.
Yeah.
And it has to be stopped, though. But it's not just the police's job or politicians' job or leaders' jobs or even my job.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of our jobs.
Right.
Every single one of us plays a role in the kingdom of God. Every
Mm-hmm.
single one of us has a vital role that helps bring on another role, like buying a cot that eventually leads to bad guys getting arrested and a life being saved. Right. Everybody has a role. So know your part, pray and know your part.
Chuck, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and for just being the trailblazer that you are, not just in San Antonio, but in the state of Texas. And I really feel like the whole country. I know that, you're such a humble person and you'll never see yourself that way, but you are a hero to so many. And I just say that for so many kids out there that know your name, because you've at some point crossed paths with them and have helped them, and they have felt like they're right at home. We'll continue to pray for you and for your family and for the work that you do at Roy Boss and in other places around San Antonio. If people want to find you, they can find you on social media. They can find you on your website. We share Chuck's website all the time on a21freedomchasers.org. So you can find him there. He's also on the podcast with Caesar. You can listen to that.